As a former nurse in the neonatal intensive care unit, I never dreamed that I could have a premature baby. In my third pregnancy at 28 weeks, I started having contractions. And I didn't think a lot of it at first. I decided to lay down and rest. I probably had done too much. But as the evening went on, they continued. So late in the evening, we were off to the hospital. At that time, I was admitted for 4 days, where I was put on a number of medications to stop the contractions, and then sent home on bed rest. A week later, I was back in the hospital for another 7 days, and this time the contractions were much more difficult to stop. And they did send me home on very strict bed rest and on a medication that had to be taken every 6 hours around the clock. I was asked to monitor for additional contractions, which continued off and on throughout the pregnancy. And I had to monitor the baby's movement to make sure that everything was still okay. Everything progressed and things were moving along quite well, and it looked like at 34 weeks I might carry the baby to term. But a trip to the OB's office indicated that that was not going to be the case that day, and that I was in labor once again, and this time they wouldn't be able to stop it. In labor, they hooked me up to a fetal monitor and monitored the baby's heart rate. And during that time, there were some late decelerations, which meant that her heart rate was going down with the contractions. So they sent me off to an ultrasound to make sure that the cord wasn't wrapped around the baby's neck. Labor continued, and things weren't progressing quite as quickly as they would have liked, and they decided it would be okay to send me home. We made it to the house, and that was about it. We turned around and went right back to the hospital. And fortunately, the baby didn't wait for us to get in the hospital, and she was born in our van in the emergency room parking lot. At the time that my daughter was born, she was limp, and I could tell she wasn't breathing. There were staff there from the hospital that were attending to us, and they were assuring me that she was okay. But as a NICU nurse, I could clearly see that things weren't okay. And I just kept shouting, please, somebody take her to the NICU. Because I knew once she got to the NICU, they'd know what to do. It was about 3 hours after that before we could see her. And I will tell you, those 3 hours of waiting were just pure agony. I couldn't stop crying, I was shaking, and no amount of reassurance would make me believe that she was okay. When we went into the NICU, my daughter, that we named Haley, was laying on a warmer. She was flat on her back. She looked very swollen. She had tape all over her face. There was an ET tube in her nose that was providing CPAP. She was on 100% oxygen. She had a feeding tube, she had an IV, she had an umbilical artery line. She continued on the ventilator, and she, within a couple of days, developed jaundice. One of the hardest things when you're the mom of a premature baby is that you're discharged to go home and your baby has to stay in the hospital. And so when Haley was 2 days old, I had not yet been able to hold her, and I was being discharged from the hospital. They did let me hold Haley before I went home, but it certainly didn't make going home any easier. Well, Haley had a difficult time bottle feeding. She was not able to suck and swallow in coordination because of her prematurity, but on top of that, she really didn't care for the bottle. And so that became sort of our only obstacle keeping us from going home, was that she couldn't take enough nutrition by bottle to gain weight for us to be able to go home. So at that point, I checked myself into a respite room for 3 days, and for 24 hours a day for 3 days, I did nothing but make sure that she ate and that she would take enough in that she could go home. And so finally the day arrived when she was going to be able to be sent home, and they did a car seat test where they put the baby in the car seat that they'll ride home in, and they monitor their heart rate, they monitor their breathing, and make sure that everything's going to be okay in the car ride home. And she passed that with flying colors, and we were off for home, where she was welcomed with open arms by her two older sisters. And we finally kind of breathed a sigh of relief that things just might be back to normal. Unfortunately, a couple of days later, Haley developed a color change. So we rushed off to the hospital where we learned that she had apnea and she also had reflux. And so she was prescribed an apnea monitor to be on a monitor at home and also on a reflux wedge. Things were settling back in, but unfortunately 2 days later she developed a very high fever, which in a newborn is a very serious thing. And so we were back in the hospital where we learned that she had contracted meningitis, which most likely was because she had been admitted to the hospital. She did fully recover though, and that first year was a lot of monitoring, a lot of doctor's visits and checkups and monthly shots to prevent RSV. But I'm happy to say that on her first birthday, just like clockwork, she took her first steps. Today, Haley is a happy, healthy, and very active 6-year-old. She loves to read. She's an avid reader. She plays soccer. She likes to play the piano. I hope that by sharing my story, you can see how important the continuum of care is. From the moment that a mom finds out she's pregnant till she hears the first heartbeat, through the whole pregnancy, labor and delivery, the newborn care, and if needed, the neonatal intensive care, until she takes her baby home for the first time and in those early years of development. Companies need to continue to bring products and solutions to market that help put both mom and baby and the whole family on the healthiest path possible.